So in today's class, we are going to be discussing on the development of the brain vesicles. Now, the brain vesicles develop from the cranial end of the neural tube. Now, at the end of the 4th week, the cephalic end of the neural tube give rise to 3 distinct dilations, and these dilations are known as the primary brain vesicles. Now, these primary brain vesicles are divided into 3. We have the Prosencephalon, the Mesencephalon, and the Rhombencephalon. So as you can see, it is written here that at the end of the 4th week, the cephalic end gives rise to 3 distinct dilations, which are the primary brain vesicles, the Prosencephalon, the Mesencephalon, and the Rhombencephalon. So I'm going to illustrate it here. So this is the first dilation, which is what our Prosencephalon. This is the second dilation, which is known as our Mesencephalon, and then this is the third dilation known as our Rhombencephalon. Okay, now within the 5th week, the primary brain vesicles now divide to give rise to 5 secondary brain vesicles, which are that the firstly, Prosencephalon divides into 2 to give rise to the Telencephalon and the Diencephalon. Then the Mesencephalon does not really show any change during development. Rather, its cavity narrows to form the cerebral aqueduct. Then lastly, the Rhombencephalon gives rise to 2 structures, which are the Metencephalon and the Myelencephalon. So there are 5 secondary brain vesicles that are derived from the primary brain vesicles, mostly the Prosencephalon and the Rhombencephalon. Remember, the Prosencephalon divides into what? The Telencephalon, which is the rostral part of the Prosencephalon, and then it enlarges to cover the what? Caudal Diencephalon. So the Telencephalon is the rostral part of the Prosencephalon, while the Diencephalon is the caudal part of the Prosencephalon. So this Telencephalon, it enlarges and then form a lateral diverticular, and then it's what covers caudal Diencephalon. So as you can see here, this is the Telencephalon. You can see how it enlarges and then forms the lateral diverticular and covers what the Diencephalon. So I'm going to label it. Prosencephalon divides into what? The first one, which is what? Telencephalon, which is rostral. And the Diencephalon, which is what? Caudal. So as you can see, this is our Prosencephalon dividing into this Cephalon and Diencephalon. So initially from primary brain vesicles, it's just these 3 we have. But at the 5th week, the Prosencephalon will now divide into what? The Telencephalon and the Diencephalon. And so the Telencephalon what enlarges, forms a lateral diverticular to now cover the Diencephalon, which is seen to be below the Telencephalon. So that's how it is presented here. Now, this remains our what? Mesencephalon. Like I said initially, that the Mesencephalon do not really divide during development. Rather, its cavity narrows to form what? The cerebral aqueduct, and that's for the passage of the cerebrospinal fluid. So it does not divide into any other structure. Now, the next we have is the Rhombencephalon. Now, I said Rhombencephalon divides into what? The Metencephalon and the Myelencephalon. So we are going to label it. This is our what? Metencephalon, and then this is our what? Myelencephalon. So this is happening at the end of 4th week, while this is happening in the 5th week. So this is our what? 5 secondary what? Brain vesicles. Why this is our what? 3 primary what? Brain vesicles. So one thing you need to know, like I was mentioning rostral and caudal, but in my next video I'm going to explain more of all these anatomical terms. So when I say rostral, I mean the upper part of something. Like this Telencephalon might be seen superior to this Diencephalon. So it's the upper part of the brain structure. So that's why it it's said to be rostral, the rostral part of the prosencephalon. Then caudal means something going towards the tail, like lower part of something. So when I say the Diencephalon is caudal to the Metencephalon, I mean it is lower to the Telencephalon. Now there's also something I forgot to note. Prosencephalon is also called the forebrain, and Metencephalon is known as the midbrain, while Rhombencephalon is known as what? The hindbrain. So I'm going to present it here. Forebrain, midbrain, and what? The hindbrain. Okay, now after getting the knowledge of our primary brain vesicles and secondary brain vesicles, these structures then form what? The adult brain structures that perform different functions. This secondary brain vesicles gives rise to adult brain structures, and now these structures tend to perform different functions in the brain. Now, the Telencephalon gives rise to structures like the cerebral hemispheres, the cerebrum, which is the site for intelligence, olfactory lobe, which is responsible for the sense of smell, and the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory storage. So, but I'll just be labeling one of each structure. One of the structures of the Telencephalon, that is the cerebral hemispheres. That's one of it. So I'm going to list in the structures of the Telencephalon. We have what? The cerebral hemispheres. We have the what? Cerebrum, which is X for intelligence. We have what? The olfactory lobe, responsible for sense of smell. Then we have the what? Hippocampus, for memory what? Storage. So these are the structures, the adult structures of the adult brain structures of the Mesencephalon. So I just labeled one, which is the cerebral hemisphere. Now the next we're talking about is the Diencephalon. So this is the Diencephalon. The Diencephalon gives rise to what? Adult brain structures like the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the epithalamus, the subthalamus, so all of that. So I'll just label two of them. At this upper part you find the word thalamus. Then the hypothalamus is somewhere here. The hypothalamus. So for the Diencephalon, we have the following structures. We have the epithalamus, we have the hypothalamus for homeostasis. This one regulates the pineal gland for sleep and wake mechanism. Then we have the subthalamus, we have the thalamus, and all of that. So these are the structures of what? The Diencephalon. Now, for the Mesencephalon just becomes what? The midbrain. The what? Midbrain. Now, also, we have the Metencephalon. The Metencephalon gives rise to the pons and the cerebellum. So we have the cerebellum and what? The pons. So, why the Metencephalon now gives rise to what? Our medulla oblongata. So, these are the necessary things you need to note. The Telencephalon gives rise to what? Adult brain structures like cerebral hemispheres, cerebrum, olfactory lobes, hippocampus. The Diencephalon gives rise to all the thalamus, epithalamus, thalamus, hypothalamus, subthalamus, and so on. Then the Mesencephalon just gives rise to the midbrain. The Metencephalon forms the cerebellum and the pons, while the Myelencephalon gives rise to what? The medulla oblongata. Now there's one other thing we need to know, the flexures of the brain. What are flexures? Flexures are just the infolding of the brain structures in order to give them their shape or the appearance they're supposed to have, and then as well form the ventricles of the brain for the passage of the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, one of those flexures, the first one we're talking about is the pontine flexure. So this flexure is seen in the middle of the Rhombencephalon. So it tends to fold in such a way that it gives the ventricle of the Rhombencephalon a diamond-shaped appearance. So you could see this diamond-shaped appearance of this ventricle, which is formed by the pontine flexure. So this diamond-shaped appearance is known as the fourth ventricle. This structure you see having this appearance is known as the fourth ventricle, and is due to the infoldings of the brain structures. So the second one was cervical flexure. So this flexure is seen at the junction of the Rhombencephalon and the spinal cord. So that's for this flexure. Junction of what? The Rhombencephalon and the what? Spinal cord. That's where you locate it. This one is seen at the what? Middle of what? The Rhombencephalon. Okay, so why this cephalic flexure is seen at the what? Region of what? The midbrain. At the region of the midbrain. So this flexure is seen at this region. So this flexure, their importance is that they just tend to bring about infoldings of the brain structures in order to form the ventricles of the brain, and as well give the brain structure their normal shape. So that's what you need to know about flexure. Now the next we're going to is the ventricles of the brain. Now these are the ventricles of the brain, and you need to know that during the development of the brain, both the primary brain vesicles, the secondary brain vesicles as well, they give rise to ventricles. Now the telencephalon gives rise to the what? Lateral ventricles. So you see one of the ventricles here and the other. So there are two lateral ventricles formed by what? The telencephalon. Then the third ventricle is formed by what? The diencephalon. The cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Cerebus is formed by what? The midbrain. And then the fourth ventricle is formed by the what? Prosencephalon. So as these brain structures are forming, they also form their what? Ventricles. And this is what? For the passage of what? Cerebrospinal fluid. So cerebrospinal fluid passes from the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle, from the third ventricle to the cerebral aqueduct, and from there to the what? Fourth ventricle. So that's what you need to know. So I'm going to be labeling these ventricles. The first one we have here is lateral ventricle. So lateral ventricle. And then this is what? Our third ventricle, which is the ventricle of the diencephalon. So third ventricle. And then the next we have the cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct. And then the next is what? The fourth ventricle, which is this diamond. Fourth ventricle, which is this almond-shaped structure, as you can see. So cerebrospinal fluid passes from the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle, from the third ventricle to the cerebral aqueduct, and then to the fourth ventricle, then pass and continue to the spinal cord. A lot of clinical anatomy when it comes to brain structure. Since each of the derivatives of brain structures, we're going to study them singly. That the encephalon is going to be studied singly, how it is developed, the telencephalon. So I'm going to explain this in my further videos, but I'm just going to be mentioning one clinical anatomy, and that's anencephaly. So what happens in anencephaly? This is a situation whereby the cranial end of the neural tube of a neonate refuses to close at the end of 4th week. So remember when we said how the brain develops, that at the end of 4th week, that the cranial end of the neural tube begins to form what? Dilation. That's where we have the Prosencephalon, Mesencephalon and Rhombencephalon. So when there is a reverse action, when the neural or the cranial end of the neural tube refuses to close, what happens? The brain structures will be exposed. And what happens? The skull will not be properly developed. And what causes is the deficiency of what? Folic acid. So that's why when a mother is pregnant, or when a woman is pregnant, they ask her to go for immunization and go to check herself. So one of the drugs they give her contains what? Folic acid, and that's what it helps for proper development of the brain or the skull. So that's for that. So I'm going to be recapping. Firstly, I mentioned that the brain vesicles develop from the cranial end of the neural tube, and they form first of all the primary brain vesicles, which are the Prosencephalon, the Mesencephalon, and the what? Rhombencephalon. Then in the 5th week, these primary brain vesicles form what? The 5 secondary brain vesicles, which are what? The Prosencephalon forms what? Telencephalon and what? The Diencephalon. Telencephalon, which is rostral, and the Diencephalon, which is what? Caudal. And then the Mesencephalon what? Remains, doesn't what? Undergo any development. And lastly, the Rhombencephalon does what? Divides into the what? Metencephalon and what? Myelencephalon. So that's for that. And then we discuss the adult structure that comes up from these secondary brain vesicles. That what? The cerebral hemisphere is the structure of the telencephalon, the cerebral, olfactory lobe, and all of that. The encephalon gives rise to what? The thalamus, epithalamus, and all the thalamus, And the mesencephalon gives rise to the midbrain. The metencephalon gives rise to what? Cerebellum and the pons. Why the what? Myelencephalon gives rise to what? The medulla oblongata. I remember but I also mentioned the flexures. The flexures are infoldings of the brain vesicles in order to form the lateral ventricles for the passage of what? The cerebrospinal fluid. And then we also mentioned that the ventricles are what? Present in each of the brain structures in order to allow for the passage of what? Cerebrospinal fluid. And finally, we talked about the clinical anatomy, which is what? Anencephaly. And we said what? It is the inability of the brain or the skull to what? Close. The cranial end of the dilatations to close. And this is due to a deficiency of folic acid. So mothers are advised to go to the hospitals when they are pregnant. They can be administered drugs that contains folic acid because it helps in what? The development of the brain. I hope you find this class interesting. Do well to what? Subscribe, comment, like, share, and also hit the subscribe button if you've not, to what? Keep you updated on new videos that I'll be releasing. Have a nice day. Bye.